Is March 20th, 2012, and we are at the home of Jeanie Hively. Jeanie has graciously accepted our offer to tell us about how Columbia City used to be and give us a little bit of history of her home. She's been here 56 years. So thank you, Jeanie, and whenever you're ready. Can you tell us about the town when you moved into this house?
Well, I had already lived in Columbia City for 9.5 years before I got to this house.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I was thinking about that a lot of people wouldn't know about, that right across the main street where we lived on the end of Hannah Street, just off of Main Street, there was a burned out flour mill. It was still standing where the car dealership is now,
Mm-hmm.
on that west side. It was still standing. It was torn down to make room for a dealership.
Was that Tuttle's Mill?
Yes.
Okay. But it wasn't in,
Well, it had burned out,
yeah.
totally. But the skeleton was still there. And in my home here, there is a little attic space way back under the eaves, and there was still a flour bag, which I hated myself for not keeping that, but I didn't realize that it would be history to me later. But it actually had colored picture on that flour bag.
Oh, how
on that mill.
neat.
And so you can see why I was kind of sorry it didn't stay with me. But it was it was filled with feathers, and the bugs had got into the feathers, and that was what I was getting rid of.
Alrighty, well, is there something you want to show us, or shall we just...
Well, yes, but not right here in the kitchen, except that here in the kitchen, it was just an absolute bare walls.
Nothing.
Nothing. Don't even think of it in relation to how it was, because there was just nothing here. There was even the remnants of a chimney that had been for a cooking stove right over your left shoulder. And when Mrs. Fromuth, the Fromuths owned the shoe store downtown.
Mm-hmm.
And so when she was getting ready to leave this property, everything was just original. The whole house was original. So from 1955 on, it made major changes.
I'll bet. Okay.
Open stairway. But as my family grew, we needed a second bath more than we needed an open stairway.
And so all this was built in? All this here,
Yes.
or you put it there?
Well,
The cabinetry.
This was the end of the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
These bookcases were in, older homes a lot of times had a wooden divider between the living area and an entry or another room. So these were remnants of what that had been.
Oh, they're beautiful.
And in all of the work that was done by the men that worked on the jobs in the house, this and that matched, but that one got broken.
Aww.
So that's, anyway, all of this area was the entry.
Oh.
And that big archway there. But this was the open stairway.
Ah.
So, as our family grew, we needed that bathroom space more than we needed the open stairway.
I'll bet, yeah.
But I can still see it because, most of the things, since I was taking colored slides during that time, just of the family. All of these changes are in some of those pictures. So that's my next project. I have 500 slides.
Oh
And I
my.
will be getting those onto a DVD. I don't have the equipment myself, but I do have a close friend that can do it for me, so.
Okay, now your son was pretty integral in doing the changing over the Columbia City 1938 tape
Yes, absolutely.
from reel to reel to cassette.
Well, the way it turned out, it seemed that in renovating somewhere, the firemen discovered that they had the original that had been done reel to reel.
Oh my.
And so Gail and I were in the business of video at Hyvidex, and it started in my home, in the room that's directly above where we are standing now. So he was able to transfer it to video, and all of this time, and he thought I had a copy of it, and he didn't anymore. And so on the telephone, because he lives in Florida now,
Mm-hmm.
and on the phone he said, "Do you still have a copy of that 1938 Columbia City?" I said, "I never did have a copy of it." And I was sending him some other things that would be of interest to him that I was doing on DVDs. And all of a sudden I thought, I'll bet the library would have a copy of this. And they did. But now I had to turn the DVD into a video and then back to a DVD.
Ooh, not an easy task.
So, at my, let's call it advanced age, I'm pretty smart about electronics,
That's very good.
enjoying every bit of it.
Okay. All right, so this is the fireplace, and I assume probably at one point in time that's how they heated this house?
When we came here, there was a Williamson furnace. Right where you're standing was one large opening for the heat to come up.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one in the dining room. That's all, and one pipe went upstairs. But that had been changed from a coal furnace to a gas unit by the time that we moved here.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, there was a coal bin down in the basement, still built up, a hole in the floor where the coal had been dumped in over the years and crashed down on the floor.
And at one point there were probably vendors here in town that would deliver the coal, or do you?
Oh, yes. Because even when we moved here, over originally on Hannah Street, we were still burning coal, and they delivered it just like on.
And were they local, or did they have to come from Fort
local.
Wayne, or?
No, they were local.
And they probably shipped it in on the
Yeah.
on the railroad and then offloaded it onto their trucks and delivered it to y'all.
Well, there was various places that that was their business.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I didn't see anything in that 1938 would indicate that, but one of the people that was named on that video was John Harris.
Mm-hmm.
He seemed to have been connected with a restaurant. But when I moved here, things that I had to carry away, that we now have a big truck come through the city and pick it up, he came to our house, and the basement door went right straight out on the ground. So he would just dive down in our backyard over there, pick up the barrel, put it in his pickup, and haul it off to somewhere.
Wow. So he wasn't just a restaurateur. He started out possibly as a
Found a way to make more money.
yeah. Okay. That's beautiful.
This has a lot of history.
So tell us about it.
Well, the violin was actually made by my grandfather. I don't know how many he made, but this one was never played because it split right down through before it was finished. And so after my grandfather died, my grandmother died, and now my mother had this, and she knew that I admired it, so she gave it to me. But the rest of the story is the music is Blue Danube Waltz.
Oh.
And as a child taking piano lessons, my mother always liked to hear me play Blue Danube Waltz.
Now, was your grandfather like a woodwright, or was he an instrument maker? A cabinet maker?
Builder. But see, my family, that grandfather came from Wells County. But in his early days, he and two of his brothers headed west, settled down in Missouri, married my mother, and they each married and had their family. I was part of that family because I was born in Missouri. And didn't come to Indiana then until just before the Depression started, and I was 2.5 years old when we moved. And all of my grandfather's family did.
The whole family moved?
Yeah, all of my mother's siblings.
Wow.
At the same time. And so anyway, this frame then was in the home of one of my great aunts that would have been involved in those boys moving to Missouri. And I used to be able to visit Missouri and family that was still there. When I was a child, we went almost every year because my grandmother was still living there. My father's mother was still living there, and his family stayed.
And so then when you came here, they were cabinet makers, or did they do other types of?
By that time, people aged rapidly in those days, so he went to farming, and they lived around Zanesville, and until he just could not, he could not work that way anymore. And actually, I'm living to a much older age than anybody else in my family, on either side of my family. And so their pictures, they looked a lot older than
they
I am,
really
but
were.
They were not.
It was harder then, huh?
Oh, tough life. When I moved here, were stacks of boxes which had been used for shipments of shoes, boots, so forth.
Oh, because the lady that owned the house
Yes,
had the shoe store.
that's correct.
Ah.
Now there's some dates, some handwritten shipment identification, covered with coal soot. They were black. You couldn't see that. But I kept thinking, I could use that in a different way.
Oh, how neat. Let's get that.
Now, let's make just a little corner here. If I can. And find them, but you can see what some of them on these ends tell you.
They tell a whole story.
And see, my life as I've lived it now, this is only part of what's wrapped up, and that's one of my granddaughters up there on the top. She's a model.
Pretty girl.
My stories, because there's titles like From My Window. Here's the index of my photography, even to when I gave it up a year ago. Waltz of the Flowers, one of the neatest things that ever happened in that library, the new library, is in this.
Oh, well,
It
cool.
is a really neat story, 'cause, you know, my life is in writing. Stories in my life, Destination Unknown, because this is about something that hasn't ended yet. So, this is, when I said a while ago, there was something that I got this morning.
Hold on
that
just
I
a
would,
sec.
So I was going to ask you first, what is it that you think of first when you think of me? Because, you know, we chat.
Well, you know, Jean, at the library, we think of the lady that parks clear at the end of the driveway and walks up, and we just think that's courageous because we don't even
I
like
would
to do
still
it.
love to be able to do that. But I'm going to have to, I think when I go to the doctor this week, since my health is very good, but my legs are not very good. And so I think I'm going to have to check and see if he can give me either a tag or I don't know if you have to have a permission to get a handicap plate for your car, but that little red car is still what I drive.
It
It's right up
is.
there.
We see you come in and we smile, and you know we do think of your photography. You have some marvelous pictures.
Well, you know, the last thing that you and I had talked about was the geese that you had photographed, and I was going to bring you a picture that, and I left it right there on the table for a long time, but that's when it got so I couldn't really read comfortably anymore, and couldn't march up the hill anymore, and so I thought, I'm never going to get it to her, so I just put it back in the album where it came out
That's
of.
fine. So tell us, did this piece come with the house?
This was part of the house. It's built right against the wall.
That's beautiful.
But as you know, upper shelves do have to
Oh
empty
yeah.
out. So in my home, I have emptied a lot of things. Top shelf there is empty. Nothing up here anymore. Things that used to just be part of my life, but I've lost quite a bit of my height. And I don't go into, I have some ladders, but I don't do any more than I just have to with that.
Don't blame you there.
Because I don't want anybody to have to pick me up off the floor and put me in a box. Was Don Chapman's brother-in-law. When he got out of the service, he had not yet set up his business. That came a little later. Under the basement stairway, you know, from upstairs to downstairs, he had a little bitty under the stairway studio where he developed things.
And this is Bill Jones, and he actually took pictures in World War II, right?
Yeah, yes. Very important pictures.
Very important pictures.
I've seen his still shots, but then I've never seen his, the things that he has really shown to groups.
But that's how he pretty much started his
Oh,
photography, is a little
And it
studio
just
under the
It
stairs.
just came home with him, and that's what.
That's
and,
neat.
I have a photograph of myself that he took, and it's got his signature on it, of course. And also, since he knew that I took a lot of pictures of fungus, he brought me one of his pictures, a nice 8x10 photograph. That was a gift.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah.
That's cool. Isn't it kind of cool that the Sunset community that Columbia City has, that they just kind of, like Bill knew that you liked those, so he brought it to you.
Because I talk about the things that I was photographing, and now I've sold my camera, so I'm not taking pictures. Well, I did have it here on the table, but one of the single-use cameras, just in case.
Well, you never
Because,
know.
You know, sometimes something just strikes your fancy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about maybe Columbia City in the 50s. What
Okay.
was it like uptown?
Well, the Kroger store was right uptown.
Kroger's
so-
was uptown.
Oh, yeah. And you could just park in front of it or around the corner, and it wasn't that crowded.
Mm-hmm. Did we have a special day that we went shopping, or?
Oh, no, just when you needed things.
Mhm.
You didn't go and buy a week's supply, payday to payday or anything. When you needed something, it was there, you could buy.
Mm-hmm.
And then across the street, and this is briefly in the video about the little grocery store that was right across the street
Mm-hmm.
on the northeast corner.
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning, that was evidently, and before my time, because the picture in the video shows it as being Daniel's brothers. They were the meat packers that are out at the end of the street there by the cemetery.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they were still in business when I was here. You could go out there and buy meat.
Wow.
And I did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But then next there was a little grocery store that went in there that I knew about that was BW or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, oh yeah, it was BW because it was Barnes and Williams.
Ah.
Williams was one of our mayors early on.
Mm-hmm.
And
the same Williams that had the grocery store out on 9 eventually? The same family, maybe?
no, I thought that Kroger's went right, and maybe it did, but they had one stop off that's right where the drive-through for the Star Bank on the back of Star Bank.
Oh, really?
And that burned out. It had been, I believe, a car dealership when I first moved here.
Mm-hmm.
And then it seemed to me there was a bakery in there, but there was a bakery there downtown.
Mm-hmm.
And that was by Jones's, but that wasn't the same as Bill Jones.
Right.
That was a different family. But, you know, they had real good donuts, all kinds of.
So, where did your kids go to school?
Well, now the way that my family is, I have 4 sons.
Mm-hmm.
I had Steve and Mike that were only 15 months apart. And so they were both born while we lived on Hannah Street. We were there for 9.5 years. So they grew up to go to the McClellan School that was just down the street.
Oh, okay.
They started there. And then when we knew that we were expecting another little Kaya, we didn't have room in the little house that we lived in there. And so we had 2 more, and they were just 1.5 years apart. But between Steve and Mike, close, there was 7.5 years till we had Gail and Barry.
Oh, my.
And so Gail and Barry grew up in this house.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just 2 weeks before Gail was born that we moved into this house. 2 weeks.
That must have been tough.
Well, I was not really truly able to do a lot, but we had a mover that it cost us $50 to move across everything we owned across town. $50.
Oh, but then that was probably a pretty penny.
Oh, well, yeah. How well I remember all those
So
pennies.
then, after you moved here, then where did the guys go to school?
They went just down the street here
To Marshall?
to Marshall.
Okay. And then,
And then the high school had not been built yet when they graduated.
oh, it had not.
No.
Okay.
So they graduated from Marshall.
Okay. What kinds of stuff did they do? in, like after school, did they have after school jobs? Did they have paper
Yes,
routes? Or?
absolutely. And I said that they didn't graduate from this building, but they did, because that building went in '62, didn't it? Well, anyway, they both graduated from there. Because, in my mind's eye, I can see them walking up the alley with their best friend, Alan McLean. The three of them. They called themselves the Sam's Club, before the Sam's Club was a store.
Okay.
Because they were Steve, Alan, and Mike.
Hey, that's pretty good.
Yeah, and I can see them walking up the alley to go to high school. So 24 collective years of passing papers.
Oh my.
Because at age 10, you could pass the Columbia City paper, which was the Post and Mail at that time. So Steve, as soon as he got to being 10 years old, he could have a paper route. And of course, Mike being 15 months younger, he apprenticed with Steve, you might say. But he went right along with Steve until he could have his own route. So then they passed papers for all those years, and along came the younger boys. Well, if their older brothers did that, they were going to do it too. And they started with the Columbia City paper, but eventually the man that was the district person for the Journal-Gazette came to the house and asked them to pass the Journal-Gazette for him.
Wow. They must have done a good job.
We had a collective number of years, 24 years of newspapers carried from boys living in this house.
Wow. That's pretty cool. So what did they do with their loot? Where did they go to spend their hard-earned money?
They were very frugal. They got this honest because we were a family that didn't have much money anyway. And so Steve and Mike liked comic books. And they spent some on comic books, but then they saved too, because they bought their first car together.
Wow.
And their second car together. And so, they managed to save. And then with Gail and Barry, they bought things that they didn't receive as gifts. For their grandparents, of course, were very helpful on that. But they saved their money and bought their first television set. And with their room being directly over where we're sitting here, they could catch the South Bend station.
Oh, neat.
We couldn't get it downstairs, but they could get it upstairs.
So, do you remember where they bought it? Did they buy it here in town, or
here in town? There was a television dealer that was right. Well, where Star Bank is, used to be across the street as Citizens Street.
Okay.
And right next door was this business where he sold television and repaired them too.
Wow.
And that was before Dick Egoff was into it, and Dick's father had his first place out there, just a few doors down on a farm next to where Pizza Hut is now. They really, Dick started with his father.
So you said the older boys like comic books. Did they get those here in town too? Like at Flox's or the drugstore?
Roffers
was
a dime store as well as a hardware. The hardware store was downstairs. The first floor was toys and other things
Mhm.
clear to the back of the store.
Ah, I didn't realize that. I thought Rockford was just a hardware store. So see, I've learned
No,
something.
it was downstairs. The library started on the upper floor there. And I do have a book that I bought from one of the very early book sales at the old library that was marked for that location.
Oh, how neat.
Mark Twain. And it's like,
Oh,
really?
neat. So by the time you had moved here, the library on Main Street was up, correct?
Oh, yes.
And do you remember any neat things about that library?
Well, one of the things is that the house that's just catty-cornered across from me right now,
Mm-hmm.
the Fite family lived there. Helen Fite worked in that library for a good many years.
Mm-hmm.
And after her husband was gone, and then my husband was gone, I didn't have to read those big books that she always carried home and read in bed because she gave me such a good review. You know, I just was amazed at how she could review those books for me. That I wasn't touched, you know, that they were just big books.
So what did grown-ups do for fun?
Well, we belonged to some things that were pretty important. My husband had been in the service, so he joined the Legion, which was right downtown.
Oh, it hasn't always been up on the hill.
No.
Ah.
It was an upstairs hall, and it was right along there where, I believe, just a couple of doors south of the Rig Pontiac
Oh, okay.
dealership.
Mm-hmm.
But upstairs, just a bare needs.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, the building out there, which I was so glad that I got a decent picture of the building.
Mm-hmm.
I have a real good picture of it that was taken not so many years ago, but all of a sudden, you know, the building started.
Yeah, that's a shame. And then there was the fire.
But I belonged to the auxiliary, held all of the offices, including president, and my husband was a commander along the way.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I know, my picture and his picture would be among the pictures that are on the wall out there.
Oh, very good. And so you had social things and
church, and I belonged to various things
Mm-hmm.
and held offices and things in church. See, I had been raised in the Nazarene church, but I didn't choose the Nazarene church here. And it was still a basement church just down on the next street, right on Elm Street,
Oh.
where that church is, just at the end of my alley here.
Mhm.
But I started at the Methodist Church, and then of course that went to the United Methodist Church later. And I had been raised in a very strict way, and so your kids don't always really want to be quite that strict, and so things were changing anyway.
Mm-hmm.
No church was quite as strict as what I had been raised.
Mm-hmm.
But I still wanted my family in church.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were close friends of Don and Edith Chapman, and they belonged to the Methodist Church. And we're still living on Hannah Street. And they had invited me to their church. And others had invited me to their church because now people were getting acquainted with who I was and what I was. And this one Sunday, I knew that Junior was not going to go to church with me that day, but me and my little boys were going to go to church this was a major if I got to that church and Don and Edith Chapman were going to church at the same moment. When I got there, they were getting out of their car.
Oh my goodness.
And I walked in with them. What more of a message is that?
Absolutely.
You know, just,
sure.
You know, I had not talked to him about that particular time. We were close friends, but I hadn't even ever said that I might want to go to their church.
Mm-hmm.
But that's how I did it.
That's very
And,
good.
and stayed there for a good many years.
Okay.
I was in the choir there too.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. And when we used to put on the Messiah, you know, the community churches and some people even from school put on the Messiah for several years.
Really? And
so
where was that?
Well, it was the last one that was held was at the Lutheran Church
Oh.
in Grace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't know they did that. That's
It was a major experience because we felt good about our performance.
Mm-hmm. And all the churches came together to do it.
All the churches, anybody that was involved in music at all.
Oh,
Good.
that's amazing. Wish we had a film of that, huh?
I do have a big picture of the last one that I was involved in, and I think it was the last one anyway, that Bill Jones was set up for.
Okay.
And that was the way the Lutheran Church used to be, because you know they made some major changes to the church after that.
Okay. Were you here when they put New 30 in?
Yes,
Yeah. What,
that was in 1962.
in 62?
Because see, my husband worked in Fort Wayne at the old Bowser plant, where later, the recent years, you might recall that was the building that the Fort Wayne Police Department went into.
Sure.
That's where I met my husband.
Oh, really?
Because during World War II, we both worked there.
Mm-hmm.
But he went into the service, and then we found out after he was away from service, from Bowser's into service, we started to correspond. And on the second anniversary of Pearl Harbor, we were married.
Oh, how sweet.
And so from there, he went directly overseas.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know where he was for 6 months.
Ooh.
Because in those days, you didn't have it on the screen in front of you in your own home.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was very, very secret. Your mail, everything was very secret, and you know they would black out anything that they thought was going to hurt the country.
Mm-hmm.
And so things, you know, in my 88 years, I've lived so many lives.
Sure. Sure.
And my memory goes back to, I don't remember coming to live in Fort Wayne when I was 2.5.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's where our first stop off was, when I was 2.5. Our family permanently moved to Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
But my sister, my younger sister, was 3.5 years younger. And I remember when she was born. And I remember things from then on.
That's
And,
very neat.
During the years that I was not working away from home and was an at-home mother, then during the years that would be 1964 especially, I was sitting right here at this table every morning after Junior would go to work, and until it was time for, because, he had to leave early,
Mm-hmm.
and until it was time for my kids to get up to go to school down the street, then I was writing about my life.
Your children will be very fortunate to have
And
that.
I reprinted it recently. All of those stories were on my little Royal portable typewriter.
Oh, no computer then, huh?
No. And so, it went from handwritten to printed on my typewriter, which I bought for myself from working at a dime store in Fort Wayne, because now, see, I grew up in Austin.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would ride the bus from Austin into Fort Wayne and work at what was Woolworths at that time. There was 3 dime stores all in a row, right across the street from the courthouse.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have so many stories, and I want them in better form. So what I did just during this last few months was reprint all of them on the current printer
Mm-hmm.
and computer, because I can do all kinds of things with that printer. And what I titled that book, and it's on one of those shelves in the old shoe shipping boxes that you saw, crates, and I titled it Passionate Journey.
Oh.
Yeah. Because, everything needs a title.
Sure. Sure.
And so that was my early years.
Mm-hmm. So then after you moved here to this house, did you work outside the house anymore? Or?
Not for a time. Now, while I lived on Hannah Street, see, I think there is some kind of modern woodman group, even yet in Park City. Well, I was secretary for Modern Woodman for 19 years. It started when I was on Hannah Street and went through until, well, it would have been about 1969, because my one son went to Vietnam during this transition. But the strange thing about it, I had to have some training to do this, because it was a lot different then. You had a children's group that you put on a party once a month, and the people came to my house, even here, to pay their insurance, because that's what it was the insurance. But the couple that trained me, as it turned out, I was on Hannah Street. I moved to Walnut Street, and they were right across the alley from me.
Oh my!
And I hadn't even met them until that time. So, you keep putting these little stories together.
Sure, everything comes
And
around.
so, when I seen that modern women was changing, I was changing, and I no longer wanted to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I always had a monthly report to the company. All the figures had to be in. And that was when I decided to be a volunteer at the Red Cross in Fort Wayne.
Oh.
So I was a Red Cross volunteer for a couple of years, and then they hired me full-time. So with my 2 being a full-time staff member and 2 years as a volunteer, I had 10 years there.
Wow.
But see, by that time, my younger boys were like 14 and 15, and they no longer, I wanted to raise my children myself. It was not done any other way, and not in those years, so, that's how I did it. And then along the way, then I gave that up and started playing around with decorating cakes and doing some things like that, which I have some pictures of those. So Junior died in, well, it was November 28th of 1982. And since I'm a person that can find things to do, because I've always been resourceful that way, I learned it from my parents. They would never survive the Depression years. And I remember the Depression years very well. But I learned it firsthand how to be resourceful. So I just didn't sit around and grieve in this house. He died in this house. But we had, I was collecting antique salt dishes and spoons when he got out there and seen what was available. He wanted to get in the business. So before he died, we were doing flea markets and antique shows.
Oh, neat.
And so, you know, just one thing, next thing, and next thing. But when he died, since he was the one that wanted to do the shows and really be in it as a business, not just a collector anymore, I'm sure that an awful lot of people would know Treva Wolf. She just died recently. Quite an important person in the city. She gave me a coupon that would be good for 3 1/2 hours of Arthur Murray dance lessons.
Oh my!
Well, I spent the next 14 years taking dance lessons at Arthur Murray.
Oh, that sounds fun.
And see, I was not allowed to do that when I was growing up in the Nazarene Church.
Oh, yeah.
You did not do a lot of things that now is just commonplace. But, yeah. So that's where I met Bob Wright, who lives in Fort Wayne. And he is just my dearest friend. People wonder, why don't you get married? Well, I don't want to ruin somebody else's life. You know, he's what he is, I'm what I am, and we're together several times a week and chat on the telephone too.
That's amazing.
But he's just the most important person in my life at this time.
That's amazing.
But he's 1.5 years older than I, and he's got a lot of physical problems. And so we do not go into each other's homes anymore. Unless there's just something special that we want to share that can't be transported. And so, yeah, we're together, and by telephone, we're in touch every day.
That's amazing. So, you have 4 sons.
4 sons.
Did they stick around Columbia City? Or?
Well, Barry has been with REMC as an accountant ever since he graduated from business school. And he's the youngest one.
CCJHS class of 75. Yep.
Pardon?
I said CCJHS class of 75. I went to school with Barry.
You went to school with him? Oh, well, you know, he's going to have a birthday today.
Oh my goodness.
Today. You probably know how old he is.
He's probably about, let's see.
How old were you
64. He's probably just about 14 days younger than me.
You're 55 years old.
I'm 55 years old.
Because see, I put it down here, BJ, 55 years. See, on Sunday morning, I make up my week's calendar.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that.
On the computer. So you can see that Bob comes on Monday. I go to Fort Wayne on Wednesday. Now usually I would be going to Fort Wayne on Saturday, but his class, he went to school in South Southside High School in Fort Wayne. So his class, if you can imagine, still gets together once a month.
Wow. Wow, that's
And,
cool.
you know, it's dwindled down until there's only about 13 that want to come or physically able to come, and he just wouldn't miss it for the world. So I know I'm not going to Fort Wayne on that Saturday. I got my house in green.
Does that mean you got to clean?
And my car is red. So when I'm going to Fort Wayne, my car graphic is in red, and this shows in black, but I usually put his times here in gray because his car is gray. Method to my magic.
Absolutely. So Barry's here still, and Gail's in Florida.
Yeah. Steve lives in Stable Acres out on 14. And Mike lives in Fort Wayne. And he was always the mechanic. Now, Steve and Barry were always the accountants. They were numbers people. So Mike was always, he knew about cars before he could even drive.
Oh, well, that's good.
And so he had his own business in Fort Wayne on the corner of Goshen and State for 25 years. And then he sold his place there and went to work for other people. Right now he's doing work with a car repair place that he's managing.
So they basically stayed pretty close to Mom and pretty close to
Well,
Mom.
but they don't nobody comes to my house.
Oh,
Nobody.
shame on 'em.
You're one of a very few.
Well, we appreciate the time that you've spent with us. Any parting shot you'd like to give?
Well, that is just sort of off of the top, and I'm not sure what would be the best way to be the finance. You know, the one thing I am is happy, and it doesn't make any difference to me that people don't fill my house with being here. You know, it's been going on for so many years that I don't even realize that nobody comes. So, but one of the people, this is a rather important little lady, Shannon Brunner. She's nearly blind. She lives over on Line Street and walks to the church that's down. And so she had caught up with the fact that she liked to see the kind of things that I put on my, I have several categories that I put on as slideshows on my computer of my own photography. And she thinks that I'm hilarious when she knows that I photograph, among other things, flowers around barns and outhouses. She thinks that's hilarious. But she likes to come and visit me because she thinks that I would be lonely. And then
that's sweet.
When she's coming and going from church, she might stop in if she sees that my car is in the garage.
So there definitely is a sense of community in Columbia City.
Yeah.
Alrighty, well, thank you for allowing us into your home and into your memories, and we will see you at the library.